Over the next few weeks, Marcus found himself adjusting to a life that felt both new and familiar. The mornings still started early, with the sun peeking through the thin curtains of their small apartment and the faint sounds of the city stirring awake. But now, those mornings held a sense of purpose, a promise that hadn't been there before. Marcus's schedule had become a delicate balance. He still helped his mother at the fruit stand, ensuring they made enough to cover daily needs. But he also dedicated his afternoons to his studies at the community center. The program wasn't easy. After being out of school for so long, Marcus struggled to catch up. Math equations seemed like puzzles missing half the pieces, and essays felt like climbing steep hills with no end in sight. But he worked through it, fueled by the vision of a better future for his family. One day, after a particularly long session at the community center, Marcus walked home with a stack of books under his arm. The streetlights flickered on as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. He'd barely made it to their building when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Marcus." He turned to see Richard stepping out of a sleek black car parked at the curb. The sight of him still felt out of place in their neighborhood. His polished shoes and crisp suit a stark contrast to the worn-down surroundings. Marcus hesitated, clutching his books tighter, before offering a small wave. "Hey, Mr. Richard," Marcus said as Richard approached. "What brings you here?" Richard smiled, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I wanted to check in on you, see how you're holding up with everything." Marcus shrugged, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "It's been a lot, but good. I'm learning a lot at the community center." Richard nodded, his expression warm. "That's what I like to hear. You're making progress, Marcus. That's what matters." As they stood there, the door to Marcus's building creaked open, and his mother stepped out, her eyes immediately narrowing when she saw Richard. She crossed her arms, standing protectively in front of Marcus. "Mr. Richard," she said, her tone cautious. "What brings you here this time?" Richard's demeanor softened. He took a small step back, offering her a polite nod. "I was just checking in on Marcus. I wanted to make sure he's settling into the program and to see if there's anything else I can do to support him." Her eyes flicked to Marcus, who nodded slightly, trying to reassure her. She sighed, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "He's doing fine," she said. "Thank you for everything you've done so far." Richard's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear that, and I want you to know, my offer still stands. If there's ever anything you need, just say the word." She didn't respond immediately, her gaze dropping to the ground. Marcus could see the internal battle playing out in her mind, the struggle between pride and the desire to give her family the best chance possible. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but we'll manage for now." Richard didn't press further. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Marcus. "Here, consider this a little something to help with school supplies or whatever else you might need." Marcus's mother opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus placed a hand on her arm, his eyes pleading. "Mom, it's for school. Please." She hesitated, then sighed, stepping back. "Fine, but we're not taking anything more than what's necessary." Richard nodded, his expression understanding. "I wouldn't expect anything less. You're a strong woman, Mrs. Carter." Her lips twitched at the corners, almost forming a smile, before she turned and headed back inside. Marcus lingered for a moment, looking up at Richard. "Thanks, Mr. Richard," Marcus said. "For everything." "You're welcome, Marcus. Keep working hard. I'm proud of you," Richard replied, clapping Marcus gently on the shoulder before heading back to his car. Over the following months, Marcus continued to juggle his responsibilities with growing confidence. He learned to manage his time more effectively, ensuring that he didn't fall behind at the community center or the fruit stand. The small apartment they called home began to feel less suffocating, filled with a renewed sense of hope and possibility. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Marcus's mother placed a worn envelope on the table. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice hesitant. "Maybe it's time we looked for a better place to live, somewhere safer, with more space for your sister to grow up." Marcus looked at her, his eyes wide. Really? Do you think we can afford it? She nodded, a small smile forming. We're not there yet, but with the money we've saved, and if things keep going well at the stand, I think it's possible. Marcus's heart swelled with pride and determination. I'll do whatever I can to help. Mom, we'll make it happen. The idea of moving to a better neighborhood became a goal for the entire family. They began saving more aggressively, cutting back on anything that wasn't essential. Marcus worked harder than ever, both at the stand and in his studies, driven by the vision of a brighter future. One afternoon, while Marcus was at the community center, his instructor pulled him aside. Ms. Daniels was a kind woman in her late 40s with a knack for seeing potential in her students. Marcus, I've been impressed with your progress, she said, her eyes warm. Have you thought about applying for a scholarship? There's a program for students like you who show promise but might not have the resources to continue their education. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. A scholarship? You think I'd have a chance? She smiled, nodding. I do, but it'll take hard work and dedication. Are you up for it? Marcus's determination flared. Yes, ma'am, I'll do whatever it takes. Over the next few weeks, Marcus poured himself into preparing for the scholarship application. He wrote essays, gathered letters of recommendation, and studied tirelessly for the required exams. His mother and sister supported him every step of the way, cheering him on and giving him the space he needed to focus. When the day came to submit his application, Marcus felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. He handed the packet to Ms. Daniels, who gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder. You've got this, Marcus, she said. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you. Weeks passed, and life continued as usual. Marcus threw himself into his responsibilities, trying not to dwell on the scholarship. Then, one crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. His family gathered around him. Dear Marcus Carter, he read aloud, his voice trembling. We are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded the Rising Stars Scholarship for outstanding academic potential and community involvement. The room erupted in cheers. His sister hugged him tightly, and his mother's eyes filled with tears of pride. You did it, Marcus, she whispered. You really did it. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt a sense of fulfillment he'd never experienced before. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he truly believed that he could shape his future. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of his journey.